So, hello and welcome to the first tea break of 2025. Hopefully, everyone's got their um, cup of tea, beverage, whatever you're drinking. I've got my little warning. I may be talking about operating time mug. Um, Today, we are going to be talking about interest and desire. So we'll come back to what we mean by that. But just by way of introduction, for those who don't know me, I'm Oliver Mantell. I'm the Director of Evidence and Insight at the Audience Agency. And today I'm joined by my colleague, Jacqui Fortnum, one of our senior consultants. So I'll do a quick audio description. I'll pass over to Jacqui to say hello and do the same. So I am a white male with blonde hair and sitting in a fairly plain background, but wearing a black t-shirt. So that's me, and over to you, Jacqui.
Hello everyone, I'm Jacqui. I'm a senior consultant with the Audience Agency. I'm a white woman in my late 50s and I'm wearing a grey jumper and a blue shirt.
I had a brief pause there because as people come in, the bar comes up and it was covering the picture of me on the screen. I was like, what do I look like? So I felt like I should know that without looking to see myself. Anyway, so in this session, we are talking about interest and desire, which hopefully isn't oversold in terms of what you think we're going to be talking about. But last time, those who were here in December when we were talking about print and digital communications, I shared this mock-up of a t-shirt that I really, really want to make, but with your kind of classic marketing AIDA awareness, interest, desire, action kind of setup on it, in a kind of Beatles mock-up style. And it's the middle bit of that we're talking about, but specifically we're going to talk about it in terms of the kind of the wider sector picture. So people's very broad interest in certain types of culture, and indeed the sort of what they want to go to. One of the reasons, amongst many others, I think this is an interesting thing to talk about, is that there are many different types of value that the arts and culture produce, but one type of value is even there amongst non-attenders. So it's sort of, if there's something there that is a draw for people or an interest to people, that in itself is value, as well as just the actual what they get out of the process of attending. And Robert Browning had this charming little quote, which I'm sure he never intended to be used for discussion of arts audiences. But a man's reach should exceed his grasp, or what's heaven for? So there's like sort of, there's something kind of interesting in that kind of what people desire, even if they don't necessarily get it. So sort of what we'll be talking about in terms of arts engagement. Specifically, we're drawing on information from the Cultural Participation Monitor, which, as long-time tea breakers will know, is our nationally representative survey. And it's represented by region, age, and gender, and weighted by audience spectrum, our segmentation model. And I'll use that a little bit later on and explain it as we go. But specifically, we're using two questions that we added on behalf of Art Fund, who are one of the supporters of the monitor this last time. And we asked people to what extent you agree or disagree with the following statements on a scale of strongly agreed, strongly disagree, or agree, disagree. Whether people are interested in visiting or going to these art forms listed at the bottom, and whether they go to them less often than they would like. So Art Fund are particularly interested in museums and people's attitudes to that, but we thought, well, if we're asking about museums, why don't we sort of sneak it in for all the others as well, just to get a comparative picture. Now, there's lots of debate, if you sort of chat to audience researchers about to what extent people's opinions about what they do really matter, or whether really it's about what they actually do. Like if you can measure someone's actual attendance, they turn up, they buy a ticket, whatever, you can see a real decision that has been made, and isn't everything else a little bit hypothetical? Someone says, oh, yeah, I'd like to go. It's like, yeah, but did you? However, I do think there is some value in looking at that kind of wider picture. Even if it just gives you a bit of an indication about how people are feeling or people's sort of overall disposition. So we're not by any means at the point of saying someone's interested in visiting or they go less often than they'd like, that they are someone who definitely will visit or will attend more often, or there are definite levers you can pull, which will suddenly convert all of these into being sort of moderately or highly engaged attenders. But with that caveat, I think it's still useful to look at, broadly speaking, who is interested and who wants to get more than they currently do. So, caveats aside, let's dive into the data. So, first thing is the extent to which people are actually interested in going to various different types of culture. Now, I should probably have given you a moment to guess what these figures would be, but I suspect, without putting you on the spot, that if I'd said what proportion of people are interested in going to music or museums or whatever, you would possibly have assumed a smaller number overall. In that, what we're looking at here is essentially a large majority of the population for most of these activities saying they are interested in going, which when we see the attendance figures, they tend to be a little bit lower than that, does suggest that actually there's quite a wide range of people who are, broadly speaking, interested in attending, with some variation, which we'll go into. But across the board, actually, that's pretty high. What does stick out is that the people that are really interested in going, people who strongly agree, it's a slightly smaller group. It's about 1 in 5, it's about 1 in 4 people. But that's still tens of millions of people in sort of the available audience. So even though it's a relatively small proportion of everyone that's interested, I think that's still pretty strong. But I think the headline is just quite how broad it is overall. Now, I should say in terms of these figures that I've compared to in terms of attendance, that in some cases, we had very, very direct comparators. So we asked people, have you been to a museum in the last 12 months, for example? So that's really nice and neat comparison. Heritage sites includes historic houses and historic parks and gardens, visiting a town or city or place for its historic character. So like if you go on a shopping trip to Chester because you think Chester looks pretty, that would get counted. That's why that number's a little bit bigger. Music performances, we asked about the types we had, which was classical music, other live performance, and gigs. Theatre performances is only plays, drama, and musical theatre. So again, that's why that figure's a little bit lower, because there's obviously lots of other stuff that happens in a theatre we didn't include. Art galleries is what it is. So broadly speaking, loads of people who say they're broadly interested. We'll get into the guts of who those people are and how they vary. But in terms of going less than people would like, you might think that actually most people would be fairly satisfied with the amount they're going. They choose to go or they choose not to go, and that's kind of what they want. But again, we're seeing a clear majority of people saying they would like to go to most of these activities more than they currently do. Art galleries, it's a bit below half. We'll come back to art galleries as a special case in a bit. But essentially, again, we've got really wide tracts of the population who say, and caveats about they say it rather than do it, but they say they would be interested in going more often. So again, hopefully good news. Now you might think, sensibly, that whether people are interested in going to the arts depends on whether they like arts and culture. If you're into the arts, you'll go. If you're not, you won't. And that's partly true. So we asked people, are arts and culture a main interest of yours, something you're quite interested in, or something which isn't an interest? And sure enough, if arts and culture are a main interest, then they want to go to pretty much all these types of things. Much higher proportions there saying they're strongly interested in each one. But what we're seeing is that it's not a case of really strong cherry picking. So it's not people saying, I'm interested in arts and culture, but I only really like music, so I'm not interested in going to the theatre, or I'm not interested in going to heritage sites. It's pretty broad across the board. If you're into arts and culture, you are at least to some extent interested in doing all these things. So that's kind of first thing. We have a broad interest. So we would expect this to have gone down when we look at people who are quite interested in arts and culture, which does, but in a particular way. So what seems to happen is particularly the people who strongly agree they're interested drops more than the total number who say they're interested. So it's more about people becoming a little bit more ambivalent about going. So they're interested in going, but not like super interested, than it is about people not saying they're interested, if that distinction makes sense. So it's more like, the pink bar becomes a larger proportion rather than the whole bar shrinks. So we might think we've got people who are really interested in arts and culture, loads of them want to do it. We've got people who are quite interested, still pretty high proportions, albeit less concentration on the strongly interested. So presumably the people who are not interested in arts and culture would not be interested in going to arts and cultural activities. We would think, yet that's not the case. So we still have more than half of people saying that they're interested in attending most of these, despite the fact that notionally overall they're not interested in arts and culture. The exception is art galleries. And I think that is notable for a couple of reasons. So I think art galleries are more associated with, they're sort of seen as more central to the idea of arts and culture as opposed to stuff you do for entertainment. So I think there's more things that people might go, oh, I don't like arts and culture, capital letters, but I like going to gigs, or I like going to the panto, or stuff on at the theatre, or, going out with the family to a museum or whatever. Whereas art galleries feels a little bit more kind of capital letters arts and culture. So if you're not into that, then you're not interested in going. So I think that's partly what's going on. And there's maybe something as well about how specific it feels as an activity as well. But no, we just keep an eye on arts and art galleries, because as we go through, they do often stick out as a bit of an exception. But nonetheless, key headline, even people who say they're not into arts and culture are potentially in the market for lots of different particular activities. If we go to whether they go less often than they would like, again, people who are really interested, even though they're really interested and therefore probably go quite a bit, possibly, still want to go more. People who are quite interested, again, not that different. Bit of a drop for the strongly agree, but not that high. Not such a big drop. And still we have reasonable proportions, getting on for, not quite, but getting on for about 50% of people, in many cases, saying that they would actually like to go more than they do, despite not being interested in arts and culture. So again, just emphasizing the impression that there is quite a big, not immediately adjacent audience. So people who don't say they're sold on the idea of arts and culture, but actually there's loads of stuff that is arts and culture that they're interested in doing. So then we get into looking at who wants to attend more, and who that available market is. So we're going to sort of tighten our definition a little bit and say, so who are the people who are interested in attending and who also say they want to attend more? Like, how many of those are? Because it could be, if those two groups are a little bit different, that's less of a strong opportunity. But in actual fact, of all people, so this is a proportion of all people, and the percentages down there, you've got more than half of people say that they are both interested and want to go more. So they're warm, and also there's extra desire to engage. For heritage sites, for museums, pretty much half for theatre performances, more than half for music performances. Art galleries, again, slightly behind, but still, really substantial proportions of people say that they're interested and also want to increase their attendance, or would like to increase their attendance. So what we've done with this is then look at who the people are who are giving these answers, split out in 3 different ways. And for those, then looking to see how this varies across the categories. So we've used audience spectrum, our segmentation model. We've used broad geography, so areas of the country and nations, and we've used age as our 3 big criteria. So, and so what we've said is, if a particular group, So whether it's people that live in the north or people who are experience seekers or who are 1624 or whatever it is, if that group is at 53% for heritage sites, we call that score 100. And if they're at 57% for museums, we call that 100. So it's just how do they compare to what an average result would be? Are they overall under that? And this is what we see as an aggregate picture. So this is audience spectrum, which some of you will know better than others, and there's loads more about it on our website. But essentially, the segments are divided into bands of higher, middle, and lower engaged, orange, yellow, and blue bars highlighted there. And different groups have different characteristics, which we'll touch on. But if we look just at the high engaged ones at the moment, metroculturals, loads of them in London, most highly engaged segment, and there's particular demand for those to engage more with art galleries. So that's kind of like it really stands out for them. And then experience seekers, also big in London, but big elsewhere as well, who tend to be relatively high engaged, but often university graduates on the edge of towns, maybe not quite as kind of big metropolitan jobs as is the case for lots of metroculturals. They're actually really high for everything. They're above average for everything, particularly art galleries, but there's lots of sort of latent demand there in terms of other areas as well. Now, commuter land culture buffs, who sat there in the middle, are sort of older, a bit further out, tend to be a little bit more traditional in their tastes, but actually they're relatively speaking less likely to be saying that they're interested and want to attend more. Now, that could be because they are attending as much as they want to, which could be a lot, but it does suggest there's not necessarily as much appetite to change those behaviours as is evident in other sectors or segments. That said, bearing in mind that 100 is still about half of people, so it's still a lot of people. We also see for some other segments particular things sticking out as being where there is most interest or appetite. So in the middle engaged groups, the yellow ones, particularly we see dormitory dependables, are particularly likely to say that they are interested in and want to attend theatre events, and for trips and treats is more like heritage sites. So again, for different groups, there may be different opportunities, and you can find out more, as shared on the link, about the particular profile and description and location of all these different groups through that. What I find quite interesting, though, at the bottom end, the lower engaged groups and the blue segments, is that you might assume that as we move down the list in terms of relative engagement, you'd see a relative drop-off in terms of interested and want to attend more. But that isn't what we see. So up our street, on average, attend more than the other ones of those groups, but actually they're less likely to say that they're both interested and want to attend. But some of the other groups, particularly, let's say, kaleidoscope creativity, relatively, well above average in terms of wanting to attend more music and being interested in music. And that could reflect that the barriers are higher for some of these other groups in particular ways. And again, we could get into that in terms of the profile and the motivation guides, etc., for each segment, see why that might be. But even supporting community is actually relatively high for a few things there. If we then can't put up by geography, we see the big outlier is loads of people in London saying that they are interested in and would like to attend art galleries relative to the average, which is still actually, because it was a lower percentage to start with, not higher than the others, but it's certainly higher relatively. And we also see there's a big pool of people in the south, maybe south outside London, who might have an interest and appetite to attend more than is currently being met for whatever reason. And that could be partly about rurality, it could be about travel distances. Some of that could be some of the sort of hangover from COVID in terms of some of the groups who are a bit more rural. It's probably a whole mixture of things. But I think, again, that's potentially of interest. And then finally, by age. And we had an interesting discussion about this in which credit where it's due, Jacqui pointed out to me that the reason why the 65 plus might be lower is that if you have, relatively speaking, more time on your hands, which is probably on average true of people who are retired, you're more able to do the things you want to do. And therefore, there probably should be less of a sense that, oh, I'd like to go more, because if you wanted to go more, you would. Whereas possibly where you've got more of a time crunch, particularly in some of those middle-age segments, that might be what's driving some of those to be above average. If that's an accurate summary, Jacqui. But also we see, again, those young people relatively more likely to have untapped desire in terms of engaging with art galleries. So again, that might be another area that particularly stands out. Is the London anomaly a sign of fear of missing out? That is interesting. Yes, it could be. That could be just a general cultural ambience thing there. Just want everything all the time, kind of thing. Want to do it all. I think that's a fair point. So this is the last thing here, which was I was curious about, given all of this, what about the people who aren't currently attending? So we have a question there: have you attended these various things in the last 12 months? Are those people saying that they are broadly speaking interested and would like to go more? You would expect that number, I think, to be relatively low, because if they're interested and want to attend, then there it is, and they don't, or at least haven't in the last 12 months. But I think that last 12 months thing is key, because people don't attend as frequently as we often think about assuming they might. So someone can be interested in a variety of things and quite easily not go for 12 months and still not feel that they've lapsed as an attender in the way that we otherwise characterize them. But I think the fact that it's quite so high across the board, getting on for 40% of people in most cases, is really interesting and suggests that we shouldn't be too quick to look at like a mailing list or whatever of people that have, quotes, lapsed because they've not been in a year, and think, oh, so maybe they're not interested, or maybe they don't want to come. There may be reasons why they haven't. There may be other barriers and issues or things about exactly what our program is or how we appeal to them. But there is a broad background interest in engagement. So all of which really leads me to think that the message here is not so much about specific, here's an answer to the question, because I think you'd need to look in specific detail about what to do, how and where to focus. But as a general framing, all of these activities are broadly popular in the population. People are broadly interested in them. People have a broad appetite to want to do more of them. And that's true whether or not they sign up to the idea of being into arts and culture, whether or not they've been in the last 12 months. A much wider span of people is like in play in terms of arts engagement, then it will be easy to assume. Specifically, loads of people are interested, but go less than they like. Not so many say who actually they're strongly want to go more. But loads of people are interested in particular art forms, even if they don't sign up to being interested in arts and culture as a thing. And even if they're quite interested in arts and culture, they may well be interested in attending things across quite a broad range. Art galleries are different for reasons we've touched on and we maybe come back to. But there do seem to be some specific things going on in terms of art galleries and these segments, metroculturals, experience seekers, with London, with the younger age groups. So there is maybe a connection and opportunity there. And maybe we should be looking to see if these people want to engage more, why is it not happening? And delving into that a bit. But more broadly, we're seeing a difference in pattern across different segments, across different parts of the country. And that might at least give us a clue if we're interested in a particular art form, a particular area, where we might want to look to get more people engaged because they want to be. So yeah, that's an overall run through, and I'm going to pass over to Jacqui for some reflections on it.
Thanks, Holly. And thank you for setting out those findings. I found it absolutely fascinating, and in particular, I think it's always reassuring to know that people are interested in doing things. I think that's always good to know, that you're not sort of shouting into the void. That there's a lot of interest out there that you can tap into, and also I think it's a really good reminder that lower levels of engagement are very rarely linked to a lack of interest in a particular type of cultural activity, but it's it's very much about people's what's relevant to people and the opportunities that they have for engagement. And I think it's also, if you take these findings and you look at them alongside other evidence that we have through other waves of the cultural participation monitor, or other bits of research that we've done. So we quite often ask people, reasons why they haven't done particular things, or reasons why they haven't attended particular art forms. And something that comes out time and time again is people saying they just haven't gotten around to it. So it's, they're thinking about it, it's there, they have an interest in it, but somehow they haven't had the sort of nudge to cross the line into engagement. And I think when you start sort of thinking about taking an audience-centered approach to your development and your engagement with your audiences, that's where these things really come into play. So thinking about what will be relevant for the people that you want to engage with. What is it that's going to prompt them to action? So they have the interest, they have the desire. How do you take that into them actually taking action and coming along? And it could be for all sorts of different reasons that they haven't quite made that leap. One of the things that I was thinking about when we were looking at the age groupings, and Ollie touched on this, was again linked to the opportunity, is that, are things open and available when people have the opportunity to attend? So if you're working full time, particularly if you're working in retail or hospitality or in frontline services, quite often the opportunities aren't there for you when you are able to attend. And that's something that organisations, you might be able to look at and think, are we giving people the people that we want to engage, are they able to engage with us when we're open? And is there anything we can do about that? Offering things at different times and so on. And the other things I was thinking about are, if you're looking for those super highly engaged experience seekers, for example, what they need to give them the nudge is something that's a kind of must see, a new thing, see it before anyone else does. And these are things that you can build into your offer development and your messaging to really tap into what is going to be the hook for people to make that decision to come and engage with you based on what their needs are and what their preferences are. So I think this is all really kind of helpful for thinking about that and being really targeted about what you do and who you're doing it for. I think I was making some notes while Ollie was talking, and I'm just trying to remind myself what I was thinking about, because I think there's quite a lot in here that you can dig into and really come out with some quite positive actions. It was interesting thinking about the art gallery question, and Ollie and I were talking about this a little bit before today's session, and the extent to which people associate art gallery with the sort of white cube contemporary art, which is quite, can be quite intimidating or difficult to access for people, compared to perhaps city art galleries, which are maybe more of an art museum, where engagement is quite high with those. So these are the sorts of questions to think about. What is it about an experience that's going to appeal to people to help them make that decision and make engagement friction free as far as possible for them, so it's easy for them to go from thinking about doing something to actually doing it. For audiences who might be a little bit more cost conscious, for example, it could be about special offers, perhaps limited time special offers to really give them a kind of nudge to action. And then you might be thinking about whether you want more first-time attenders or whether you want to encourage repeat attending. And then your offer might be structured around, if you do this, then you get a reduced rate on future opportunities and things like that. So it's sort of thinking about how you can build this insight and this understanding of how people are engaging and what they're thinking about into your strategic planning and development. So those were really the sorts of things that I was thinking about. But overall, I think there are some really positive things that you can take from this and put into action. That's my,
Wow.
my response.
That prompts me to think about a couple of things. One is whether there's could be emphasis on taking people on the kind of on a journey in terms of if you're already quite interested, how do you start building that interest so that you become very interested and kind of take people on that kind of trip, and what does that look like? What kind of resources or activities or ways of meeting people where they are, but then helping that to happen could be there. But as also that thing about opening hours, because I appreciate for lots of people who think, oh, it's really difficult to change your opening hours because it's a big upheaval. But if there is, as we think there probably is from this, a fairly widespread, there's a whole load of people who want to attend for reasons that aren't as much as they could be. It could be that even just occasional late openings or variations would be enough to let those people at least get their chance to do their kind of annual visit or whatever. And obviously we've seen museum lates and things we see popular and successful in lots of places. And that could be partly as a response to that same issue. So that's a thought. So that's our thoughts about it. What are yours? That started quite smoothly through things, didn't it? Does anyone have anything they want to observe from your experience or reflections or even questions based on what we've said so far?